obese, it called them. But that's Wii Fit, where you'd at least expect the topic of weight to come up. But in 2013, Nintendo released a new Zelda game called A Link Between Worlds. And, unexpectedly, the original Japanese game contained such blatant fat-shaming that Nintendo of America actually had to rewrite part of the game's plot to avoid offending players. Let's explore the Zelda game that fat-shamed its own characters. Our story goes back to the year 2009. A team of developers at Nintendo had just finished work on the Zelda game Spirit Tracks for the DS. Once the game was done, most of those developers immediately jumped over to work on Skyward Sword, another Zelda game. But a small team of 3 people instead began brainstorming ideas for a new handheld Zelda game. After some ups and downs and one crushing rejection by Shigeru Miyamoto, the team had an idea. What if Link could merge in and out of walls? So the team spent some time building a prototype based around this idea, when, all of a sudden, all 3 of those developers were called away from the project to work on something more urgent, launch titles for Nintendo's upcoming Wii U console. But a few years later, this Zelda prototype built around merging into walls entered development once more. It was Shigeru Miyamoto who suggested setting the game in the same world as A Link to the Past, one of the Zelda series' most iconic games. And the result of all this work was the critically acclaimed A Link Between Worlds, which was finally released in 2013.
What information do you think Google has about you?
Search requests, financial transactions, places I go to eat.
Does that make
But inside the game, there exists something unusually controversial for a Nintendo game. There's a part of the game's overworld full of rivers and lakes called Zora's Domain, a staple of the Zelda series. And if you explore for a bit, you'll stumble into a suspicious-looking thief emerging from this huge waterfall. And he seems to be carrying a big gem that he stole from somewhere. Enter that waterfall and you'll meet the Queen of the Zoras, called Erin. And you'll immediately notice that Erin is much larger in size than any of the other Zoras found in the game. The Queen is in a sea of trouble. We've got to do something, says one of the Zoras. I can't believe that guy came in and stole the smooth gem right out from under our gills. That finless jerk probably thought it was just some sparkly thing, but the Queen needs it to contain her power. Without that smooth gem, our Queen will She'll keep bloating up. So that's the situation. The smooth gem, which Queen Erin of the Zoras normally uses to contain her power, has been stolen, causing her to physically bloat up in size. It's a slightly unusual premise, perhaps, but I don't think it's inherently offensive. But it turns out the translators at Nintendo of America worked very hard to make sure it wasn't offensive. Because, in the original Japanese version of the game, this scene has a few important differences. Translator Clyde Mandolin produced a direct translation of the original Japanese text. This is terrible, Zora. The secret of the Queen's beauty, the smooth stone, has been stolen, Zora. As long as the smooth stone is gone from the fountain, there's no telling what'll happen. So, as you can see, originally there was no mention of the Queen's immense power, which the smooth gem helped to contain. Instead, the smooth gem is stated to be the source of the Queen's beauty, the implication being that without it, the Queen grows ugly. And in this case, ugly means fat. That's not the end of things, though. If you speak to one of the other Zora creatures, he'll say this: "We've got to get it back in her pool before all is lost." Seems like an ordinary, unremarkable line of dialogue. But what this same character says in the Japanese version translates to this: "But I actually kinda like her even looking like that, Zora." Nintendo of America completely removed this line, replacing it with something more generic. As Clyde Mandolin, the translator, wrote on his blog, the Japanese line implies that she's probably not what most Zoras would consider beautiful. The English version removes this concept entirely and replaces it with a line about the urgency of the situation. So, if you keep playing the game, you'll eventually track down the thief who stole the smooth gem. But by the time you find him, he's already sold it to a merchant, so then you have to buy the gem back from the merchant. It's a whole thing. But eventually, you get the Queen's gem back. And when you return to Zora's domain, one of the Zoras says, "Wait, stranger, do you have the Queen's smooth gem? Throw it in the pool, hurry!" Which causes the following scene to take place. The Queen! The bloating has stopped! And if you talk to some of the other Zoras, they'll also say things like, "What a relief!" And again, that line sounds innocuous enough, but it was completely rewritten by Nintendo of America. The original Japanese line reads, "What a relief, Zora. The Queen has regained her beauty, Zora." Again, any reference to the Queen's beauty is completely removed from the English version. Another Zora will tell you, in the English version, "The Queen's bloating stopped. I wish the Queen would do away with the pool and that magical gem." Which sounds fine, but the original line was, "The Queen has regained her beauty, Zora, but I actually kinda liked the way she was before, Zora." At a glance, you might think this line is actually progressive and supportive. The Zora thinks the Queen is beautiful, even when she's not slim. But it seems pretty obvious that this line is meant to be comedic relief, not a serious sentiment, especially when you look at the same Zora's earlier line of dialogue. And then, there's one last scene that Nintendo of America rewrote. After returning the Queen's missing gem, you can find a lone Zora standing atop a cliff in Zora's domain. Talk to him, and he'll say this: "Nice weather today, so I swam here with the Queen, but she swims so fast, and I got left behind." Compare that with the original Japanese dialogue, which reads, "Nice weather today, isn't it, Zora? I just went swimming with the Queen, Zora. Now that she's slim, she swims so fast. Before I knew it, I got left behind." The Zora continues in the English version to say this: "I'm hurt, to be honest. The Queen left me behind. My Queen, my Queen." But in the Japanese